So yesterday, as we studied the book of Mark, we discovered that Jesus, now that the disciples understood who Jesus was, he could address the question, what did Jesus come to do? And his answer is very simple. I came to die. I will be betrayed. I will be tortured. I'll be put to death. But 3 days later, I will rise from the dead. Now, chapter 8, verse 32 says he spoke plainly about this. And Peter took him aside, and Peter began to rebuke Jesus. Jesus turned and he looked at his disciples, and then he turned to Jesus and he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. A couple of things that we see here. Peter's reaction is very normal. Jesus didn't fulfill his expectation. He expected Jesus to lead a military plot against Rome, rally the troops, fight against Rome, defeat Rome, bring Israel back to world domination. But instead of that, Jesus said, I'm going to die. And what's worse, the Romans are the ones who are going to kill me. Peter wasn't expecting that, so he decides to correct Jesus, takes him aside and says, no. You got this wrong. Listen, yesterday I mentioned that I think that the disciples, certainly Peter, was thinking Jesus is talking in parables. Peter takes Jesus aside and says, listen, I get this stuff about a seed falls to the ground and dies and it rises again. I know that you're not really going to die, but these guys just don't understand. They're getting confused. Second thing, Jesus, the scripture says, turns and looks at the disciples. Then he turns back to Peter and he addresses Peter so that the disciples will hear. Get out of my way, Satan. That's essentially what Jesus says. Now he calls him Satan, which is not so much a name as it is a title, the accuser. Peter, you're tempting me. Peter, you are performing the function of Satan at this time. In anticipation of Gethsemane, we know that Jesus didn't necessarily want to die, but he would do it because he knew that's what the Father wanted. And so Jesus looks to Peter and says, you're tempting me. Get out of my way. Third thing, it doesn't come across so clearly in Mark, but in the book of Matthew, after Peter says, you're the Messiah, Jesus says, you've been talking to God. You didn't hear this from men. You heard this from God. Now, Jesus looks at Peter and says, your mind is not on godly things. You're thinking like a man. Jesus hit the nail right on the head. God had a plan that he was setting in motion. Peter was rejecting that plan. What about you? The Lord calls us sometimes to do difficult things. Things that are not pleasant. Things that bring us to sacrifice. And it's easy for us to rationalize. That's not what he really wants. Or maybe I should just try to understand more. Or I need to wait. Maybe this feeling will go away. Sometimes we're called to do difficult things, whether that's talk to a friend, whether that's talk to a neighbor, whether that's change a job. God calls us. Our duty is to obey. Whatever is holding us back, we need to say, get out of my way, Satan. Help me to think God's thoughts and not man's. Help me to do what you've called me to do. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the difficult thing that Jesus then asks his disciples to do. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.